When it comes to looking at the Seattle Kraken expansion draft coming up this summer and projecting their potential roster coming out of it, there are going to be some teams where the Kraken will pick a player from them and then either trade or even potentially waive that player after the fact. But it's still important, and we're still going to look at each one of these teams and their situation coming into the expansion draft, even if that does end up being the case for a few of them. And with today's team, they definitely could be one of those teams, because we're looking at the Buffalo Sabres. By the way, if you do find yourself enjoying this video and you like to do that kind of thing, the subscribe button down there can probably help you out. Now, to be fair to the Sabres, ever since that record-long losing streak where they lost 18 straight, the team has gone 7-5-2, more than doubling their win total in the last couple of weeks. A run which is even more impressive considering the fact that they did all of it without Jack Eichel and after having been sellers at the trade deadline, where they saw guys like Curtis Lazar, Eric Staal, and of course Taylor Hall leave the team. But even with that said, and now it also looking likely that they will at least catch the Devils so that they aren't the worst team in the NHL come the end of the season, the Sabres still expected a lot more out of this year coming into it, and it has been nothing short of incredibly disappointing for them. I guess maybe the one silver lining for them in all this is that because of the season they had and the fact that they were able to trade off a number of pieces during the trade deadline, it has made it a lot easier for them to protect all of the guys they'll probably want to come the expansion draft. So then as we do get to the protection list, where I do think it's pretty likely they'll be going the 7-3 route, it does mean that guys like obviously Jack Eichel, as well as probably Sam Reinhart, Victor Olofsson, and Casey Mittelstadt are all pretty much locks to be protected. I also think that it's fairly safe to say, considering how he's played for them so far and the fact that he was part of the Hall trade, that Anders Bjork is probably going to end up on this protection list. And then, of course, there's Jeff Skinner with that no movement clause, which, for the sake of argument and simplicity, we're not going to assume that he waives. And then that 7th slot could go to any one of a number of guys, but for now I'm going to assume they probably lean towards protecting some of their younger players, so I have that going to Tage Thompson. Even with the year that he's had, though, to be fair, that's something you could probably say for most of this roster. Now, I know, Jeff Skinner is very likely to end up being asked to waive that no movement clause, and considering how things have gone for him in Buffalo, I can't for the life of me think of a reason why he wouldn't say yes to waiving it. Which then would open up another protection slot for someone like Zemgus Girgensson, or maybe a more veteran player like Cody Eakin, or even Kyle Okposo. But there also is another young guy that could very well get that protection slot in Rasmus Asplund, plus we know how much the Sabres like players named Rasmus. Because as we get to the players protected on the defensive end, I do think it's pretty likely that both Rasmus Ristolainen and Rasmus Dahlin end up protected, Dahlin being a clear lock. And then at least to me, right now anyway, that third protection slot probably ends up going to Henri Jokiharju. And then in goal, I don't see much reason that Linus Ullmark wouldn't be the protected goaltender. Maybe they pick up someone between now and the expansion draft that they'd rather not lose, but I think it's fairly safe to say right now that Ullmark is the protected goaltender. And of course, beyond the protection list itself, the Sabres do have a fair number of exempt players when it comes to the expansion draft as well, which does include Dylan Cousins, so he won't even be someone they have to worry about. So now as we do start getting to some of the players that could be available for the Kraken to select from, starting with a couple of guys that were on that protection list, if somehow Anders Bjork is available, then I do think he's an easy pickup for the Kraken here. And I did talk about him in the Bruins video, so if you want to know a little bit more about him, then I'll link that down below. But again, with him being a bit on the younger side and having played very well in Buffalo so far, especially considering how the rest of the team has played so far this season, I don't see much reason that they would leave him exposed. The other guy that I did have on that protection list that honestly probably won't be there all things considered would be Jeff Skinner. Now, of course, again, I only had him on the protection list in the first place because of his no movement clause, which, all things considered, I do think is much more likely than not that he will end up waiving. And if he were to waive that no movement clause, then, at least from a skill standpoint anyway, he probably would be the best player the Kraken could pick here, even considering how his last couple of seasons have gone in Buffalo. Unfortunately, I don't think it's terribly likely that the Kraken would look too hard at picking him, unless they were heavily incentivized otherwise by the Sabres to do so. And that, of course, is because of that contract that is tied to him, which is easily among the worst contracts in the NHL, if not at the top of that list, which sees him earning $9 million per year through 2027, which in a league whose cap is going to be staying flat at $81 million at least for the next couple of years. While I do think there is again still some pretty good hockey left in Skinner, he very much at this point is not worth a ninth of your salary cap space. Fortunately for the Kraken though, if it is a forward with a decent amount of NHL experience and at least some amount of scoring upside potential that the Kraken are looking for when it comes to picking from the Sabres, Cody Eakin is much cheaper than Skinner at just $2.25 million through 2022. Now, yes, last season, and now again this season, Eakin has not performed particularly well, especially when it comes to points production. But the 29-year-old center does have 243 career points in 630 games in the 10 seasons he's been in the league, that coming on 105 goals and 138 assists. So while he definitely does have his down years from a points production standpoint, which these last two have not been the only ones of his career, he also has had a number of seasons where he's been right around a half a point per game type of player. Which granted, even that probably wouldn't earn him a whole lot of time on a first or even second line. The fact that he does play a fairly decent two-way game and even has a little bit of a physical aspect to his game could make him fit pretty well, especially with his experience on a third line for the Kraken. Plus, he is just 2 years removed from that 22-goal season where he had 41 points in 78 games for the Golden Knights in 2018-19. And of course, on top of that, that was also his second season with the Golden Knights, as he is one of the few players that will be available for the Kraken that does have experience with being selected in an expansion draft, as he was picked by the Golden Knights from the Stars back in 2017. Where of course he did center Vegas's third line during that inaugural season that saw them make that run to the Stanley Cup Finals, so he would offer some pretty uniquely valuable experience to the Kraken in that way. But if the Kraken aren't quite as worried about potential points production from their third or fourth line, or maybe they just don't think that Eakin is likely to get anywhere near that 20 goals that he had a couple of years in Vegas again, then they could lean quite a bit more into the physical aspect of the game with a guy like Zemgus Girgensson, who we mentioned before. The 27-year-old former 14th overall pick has played in at least part of 7 different NHL seasons, where he's played in 489 games with 138 points on 61 goals and 77 assists. Of course, with the one standout of that 30-point, 15-goal, 15-assist, 61-game season in the 2014-15 year. But again, points production is not really the point of Girgensson's game. No, he is definitely much more of a physical type of forward that is there to make sure that opposing players think twice when handling the puck, with 921 career hits in those nearly 500 career games, where he has been easily over 100 hits per season in each year that he's played in the league. Now, it is also fair to mention that the physical aspect of his game, while it definitely does stand out, is pretty much the only part of his game that stands out in a particularly positive way, as when it comes to his possession metrics, things do not look very good there over the course of his career, where he has a 45.8 Corsi for percentage, and a negative 33.5 accumulated expected plus minus over the course of his career. But again, as we've mentioned in a number of these videos so far, for a team like the Kraken, who could very well be looking to be a little bit more of the physical, defensively minded team in at least the first couple of seasons, this could very well be the type of player that they could look for on, again, a third or probably more likely fourth line. Of course, assuming he can get back to 100% and then stay healthy, coming back from the hamstring injury that kept him out during this season. But of course, with a team like Buffalo, where pickings could be a little bit more slim when it comes to proven NHL talent come the expansion draft, the Kraken might be better served to go more the younger route and look for more future potential, which, if that's the case, someone like Rasmus Asplund could definitely fit that role. At 23 years old, Asplund has only played in 49 games over the last 2 seasons, where he has 11 points on 7 goals and 4 assists. Though, to be fair, 6 goals and 2 assists of those do come in the 20 games that he's played this year. But with that said, at the AHL level, he certainly hasn't been an elite point scorer by any means there either, somewhere around a half a point per game type of player at that level. So he certainly still has a lot to prove, but he is a young player that could still potentially have a lot of career left ahead of him, and again is the type of guy that the Kraken could look at as more of a potential prospect type of pick. But of course, there is also the fact that he is set to be an RFA at the end of the season as things stand right now, so he would need an extension before the expansion draft if the Kraken were really even going to consider picking him, especially with both Girgensson and Eichel already being signed for next year. On the defensive end, if Yoki Haru, who I had protected, is available, and assuming Bjork is protected on the forward end, I think he would probably be the most easy pick for the Kraken here. But again, assuming he's protected, that means that the only guy signed through next season that probably could be tempting for the Kraken would be Colin Miller. But Miller could actually be a pretty decent pickup for the Kraken. The 28-year-old right-shotted defenseman has played in at least part of 6 different NHL seasons where he's played in 345 games with 119 points on 27 goals and 92 assists. So for especially a right-shotted defenseman, Miller could actually offer some pretty decent points production for the Kraken. And granted, the last 2 seasons for him in that category haven't looked particularly great, with just 11 points in 51 games last year with just 1 goal, and now just 9 points in 44 games so far this season. But like Eichel on the forward end, that's coming off of a couple of seasons of pretty decent points production where he had 41 points on 10 goals and 31 assists in 82 games in the 2017-18 season, and then 29 points in 65 games the following year, both of those playing for the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, granted, some of that points production drop over the last couple of years could be due to the fact that Buffalo has had a little bit harder time scoring points than Vegas has, but that isn't the only aspect of his game that he did quite a bit better while in Vegas than he has in Buffalo. Because when it comes to his hits and the physical part of the game, in Buffalo he has been around 90 hits per season, and even with those being shorter seasons than the ones he had in Vegas, there he had 165 in his first season and then 122 in the second one. And then on top of that, when you look at his advanced stats and the possession metrics with his Corsi for percentage, in the 2 years in Vegas, he was right around and above 56% in each of the 2 years, coming off of having been 60.3% in Boston the year before being drafted by the Golden Knights, while in Buffalo, he's struggled to even get to 50%. Plus, of course, again, he comes with that upside of having the experience of being drafted onto an expansion team that performed very well, as he was the Golden Knights pick from the Boston Bruins back in 2017. So, while Eichel does have, again, pretty unique experience to offer the Kraken in that way, it isn't necessarily unique on the team that he plays on, as Miller can offer the same thing. A couple of other potential guys to look at on the defensive end would be one, Jake Mccabe, who at 27 has a similar amount of NHL experience to Miller, having played in 353 games across 8 seasons. But on top of being a left-shotted defenseman to Miller's right shot, he also doesn't offer quite as much as far as points production is concerned, with just 77 career points in those 353 games. Plus, on top of that, although like Miller, he does offer a decent physical aspect to his game, he doesn't offer quite as much or look quite as good when it comes to the possession metrics as Miller does. Although some of that could be due to the fact that he spent the entirety of his career in Buffalo while Miller got to play in Boston and Vegas, but it's kind of hard to say. And then of course there's also the fact that Mccabe is set to be UFA at the end of the season, so he would definitely need a new contract before the expansion draft if the Kraken were even going to look at him. And then of course, as far as a younger, more prospect type of player, William Borgen could potentially fill that role. He also has not played very much at the NHL level, with just 10 career games where he has yet to score a point, and at the AHL level also doesn't put up a whole lot of points. But again, this is the type of guy that at age 24, if you were going to be drafting him, it would be more hoping you could develop him into an NHL player down the road. Though he too would need an extension before the expansion draft, as he is currently set to be an RFA at the end of this season. And in goal, I suppose there's Dylan Takarsky, but I really don't think that he's tempting enough to pick him over some of the other goaltending options elsewhere, and I do think that someone like Colin Miller is good enough to pick over just another goaltender. So in the end, for me anyway, when it comes to the Buffalo Sabres, if the protection list does look somewhat like what I have here, even if Skinner does end up waiving his no movement clause and then another one of those guys ends up getting protected on the forward end, I do think that for the Kraken right now, the best option to me is Colin Miller. I mean, he certainly wouldn't be the flashiest pick, but he does offer a decent amount of points production, again, especially from a right-shotted defenseman. Plus, he does have that fairly unique experience when it comes to this expansion draft of having been a part of that Vegas expansion draft that saw them go to the Stanley Cup Finals in that first year. So he would be able to at least give some perspective to the other guys of what it looks like to be a part of a team that's coming together for the first time and be successful doing so. Now, yes, granted, the last couple of years for him in Buffalo have not gone as well as they possibly could have. But again, the same can pretty much be said for the majority of the Buffalo roster over the last couple of years, so I am going to lean a little bit more on what he was able to do for more contending teams with Boston and then Vegas the years before he played for Buffalo. Of course, there is always the outside chance possibility that Miller ends up getting protected by the Sabres, but in that case it probably means that Jokiharju has been exposed, in which case I think the Kraken just take him. Unless, of course, again, Bjork somehow ends up exposed on the forward end, but again, I don't think that's terribly likely. Really, the one big wildcard in all of this is whether or not the Sabres try to make a deal with the Kraken in order for Seattle to take on Jeff Skinner and his contract. Now again, yes, he does have a no movement clause, but considering how things have gone for him in Buffalo, especially this season, I don't think that it's terribly out of the question to say that he probably wants a second chance somewhere else as much as Buffalo wants his contract off their books. So a trade is definitely something to consider here. Of course, with that having been said, Skinner's contract is really bad. So in order for Seattle to be taking that on, Buffalo would have to offer them a decent return, unless of course they were going to retain part of that contract. But the Sabres do actually have a decent amount that they can offer the Kraken in exchange for taking on the Skinner contract. Of course, there are prospects like Dylan Cousins or maybe Jack Quinn, but the Sabres also have a good number of draft picks that they could also look at parting with in order to help their cause. Of course, what the details of a trade that big could potentially end up looking like, especially considering Buffalo also could end up retaining part of that salary, that's probably a discussion for another time. So for now, if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below. Otherwise, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Buffalo Sabres and who you think they could protect, expose, or what a trade for Skinner could potentially end up looking like. But with that, stay safe out there and be good to each other. Peace.